Hi, so this is the fourth lesson. So in this one, we're going to be looking at the factors that affect the performance of those internal components that we spoke about previously. So just a bit more depth about those internal components. So here, for example, talking about the CPU, there are factors that affect your choice of CPU. So in a typical exam question, you might be asked to look at some different CPUs and which one would you choose for a given scenario or given computer. And so let's look at some of the factors that would influence your choice. So a CPU, as we know, has a clock speed, so that's the number of instructions that it can process in any given second, and that is measured, as we said, in hertz or gigahertz, megahertz, and then gigahertz. But we also have cache. Now, cache is the ability to store, have a little bit of memory on the CPU itself. Okay, and so if we want to be able to store things onto the CPU, that would really help to reduce the need to go fetch instructions from RAM, hence then improving the performance of that particular thing. Say for example, you're constantly using the same instruction on the CPU as opposed to going to fetch that instruction from RAM. If we're able to store it locally, then that would make it a lot faster. And that's exactly what the level 1 internal cache provides us with. And so it provides us with very fast storage within memory, I should say, within the CPU. And however, it can only hold a small amount of instructions. Now the level 2 cache is external to the CPU itself, and so it will be stored on external to the CPU, and likewise with level 3. Now, as the numbers go up, there is more that you're able to store, but it's slower because, as we mentioned, it's having to get the information from a different point. Still be faster than fetching it from RAM, however. Right. Other factors that can affect the performance of your CPU or the setup is the amount of heat that's been generated and how that heat can be dissipated. So what we mean by that is how the heat can be transferred away from the CPU. And so to do so, we would use a cooling fan put on top of the CPU and to reduce the heat. And we mentioned previously the number of cores could also affect the performance of the CPU. A single core will do potentially half of a dual core if they're given same specification. Of course, in an exam you might be given a trick question. For example, a 8 gigahertz single core processor in comparison to, let's say, a 4 gigahertz dual core will be exactly the same type of specification. They will process the same amount. Or if we compare that 8 gigahertz single core to a I don't know, a 1 gigahertz dual core, then that would do half the processing really of that single core. But it's basically simple maths. You're times in by 1, times in by 2 or 4 in terms of this. Right, and then in terms of RAM, we have different types of RAM. We have SRAM and DRAM. One being static, the other being dynamic. Again, if you look at the link here below, you'll be able to find more information on those. And then the size of RAM will be affected by how much content you are able to store on it, hence how much the CPU can rely on the RAM to keep hold of all of that information. So that would also affect the performance. Right, in terms of hard disk drive, some of the things that might affect its performance is the type of connection it has, IDE being one of them. SATA is the most beneficial in terms of speed. It has, I believe, 10 times the speed of IDE. SCSI is no longer used much these days in terms of a way of being able to connect. And capacity, of course, is a factor, how much you're able to store in it. Speed is another factor, how quickly the data can be accessed, and for an external hard drive, how portable it is. And then we mentioned previously what an SSD is. They have different form factors. We have the 2.5-inch form factor, which will be used in a laptop or PC, and then the micro SATA one, which is used mostly in portable devices such as a tablet or a mobile phone. And as we mentioned previously, the key factor is that they have no moving parts. Okay, so yeah, that covers that, and that covers that lesson.